Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DeWars.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DeWars, LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
Kip, what are we going to talk about today?
Jake, today we're going to talk about who's causing all the trouble on the internet that our customers are having that we can see. And in other words, why will the global cost of cybersecurity failures reach $6 trillion by the year 2021?
Did you mean billion or did you actually mean trillion?
Yeah, trillion with a T. It's funny, I've never seen a trillion of anything. How about you?
No.
I've never seen a trillion of anything. And so so when 6 trillion is the estimate that's thrown around, I mean, it just really boggles the mind. But that's worldwide global cost of cyber failures in aggregates. It's amazing. And today, you know, in 2018, it's around 2 trillion. And about 3 years ago, it was 500 billion.
Wow. So it's really growing fast.
It's escalating, and so you just have to wonder, right? What in the world's causing all this, right? What is the story behind the trend? And so I thought our listeners would enjoy getting a little peek at that. And so we've got a little slide presentation that we want to share with you guys today, our listeners. And we call this Anatomy of a Hack: The Internet Age of Criminals. Because guess what? That's exactly what's going on. Is criminality is a big driver behind what's happening today. And so we thought we'd start by just giving you a couple of examples of the kind of things that are happening. So I don't know if anybody ever heard of CodeSpaces before. I hadn't, quite frankly, until something really terrible happened to them. But in 2014, this company, which had 200 business customers and provided cloud storage for their customers' source code and different kinds of hosting capabilities, 200 customers. And in 2014, they went out of business in 12 hours. Can you believe it? Due to a hack. And I don't know if I ever shared this the details with you, Jake. But what happened was CodeSpaces used Amazon's EC2 in order to build out their infrastructure rather than rack and stack their own servers and buy their own space in a data center. And so what happened was they had a control panel on their EC2 product, and it got broken into.
Well,
and
what's an EC2 product for those who don't know?
So that's elastic compute. And what that means is that rather than buy a fixed number of servers, if you're going to offer a technology service on the open market, you can go to Amazon and you can buy an practically unlimited amount of CPU and memory. And so you can just buy it as a service. And so as your computing demands go up and down, you can buy more or buy less CPU and memory. And it's a very cost-effective way to do computing. It turns computing into, like buying electricity, right? Turns it into a utility. So, I mean, that's a very wonderful thing.
So it's a great example of a cloud-based infrastructure.
Yep. Yeah, and so CodeSpaces had this all, working for them, and somebody broke into their control panel and left some pretty heavy extortion demands on them, which they refused to to comply with. And so, because these were very tech savvy people, they actually attempted to fight back and regain control over their control panel. And but the extortionists were watching and said, "Oh, you want to fight back? Well, then we're going to pull the plug on you." And the extortioners deleted all the data belonging to Codespaces and all the data belonging to the customers. And the cost of recovering from that just rapidly was out of reach for them, and they threw in the towel and shut down. So what you're seeing here is a screen capture of their website just before they folded. It's an amazing story, and it's interesting because it's so underreported. I mean, I don't remember seeing this in the newspapers.
No, I don't recall either.
But it just kind of goes to the heart of what kinds of things can happen to you on the internet these days in terms of cyber risk. I thought another recent example would be helpful here. So this is a screenshot of a news story about Hancock Regional Hospital. And like other hospitals, they got hit with a pretty hurtful ransomware attack, right? So their computers were encrypted, many of them were, and they were unable to keep their doors open and serve patients fully. And so the CEO of the hospital had to choose whether he was going to pay ransom, a $55,000 ransom to get control of his computers back, or whether he was going to attempt to regain control of his computers on his own. And so this just happened earlier this year. And unfortunately for our online community, the CEO decided to pay the ransom. And to me, that's like casting 55,000 votes for more attacks online. So I've never been in a situation where I've had to make that kind of decision. So I hesitate to say that that he was completely wrong in every way. But I just know that those kinds of decisions are not good for our online community. And again, what a terrible situation to find yourself in. These kinds of cyber risks that threaten your organization so thoroughly.
Yeah, and it's the $55,000 doesn't seem like much, and I would say that unfortunately, what might not be obvious is that these ransomware purveyors started off asking for $500. So if you think of it in an escalation, numbers, they're up to 10 times, 100 times what they used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going up.
It's going up. So it's probably not too long before we start seeing ransom demands for, so-called real money.
Yeah. Well, and it wouldn't be surprising in the sense that if you look at it from the other side, what we have is the cost of recovering from an attack like this, if you choose not to pay the ransom, can be in the millions of dollars, right? Yep. This is not trivial. You're going to have direct costs of millions of dollars. You're going to have the opportunity cost of not serving customers and not generating revenue, during the period of time in which you are recovering. And we've seen other medical centers refuse to pay the ransom and to elect to recover on their own, and it can take weeks. And while that's happening, they're either not serving patients or they're going back to old time methods of pen and paper record keeping, and then and even if they can figure out how to do that, once the systems come back online, they've got a closet full of paper records that they now have to digitize, right? So, I mean, it's a big burden. I totally get it.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's talk for a few minutes about what's going on here. Like, why is this happening? What's going on behind the scenes? And I don't know if you remember the 1983 movie War Games with Matthew Broderick, but that movie really kind of thrust this stereotype onto the main stage of the world. This idea of a bored but curious teenager who has a computer and more time in his hands than he knows what to do with, and accidentally almost starts World War III. And this this perspective is just still stuck in a lot of people's minds. People still think this is what cyber risks on the internet are all about.
Which is not true.
No, not at
So
all. Which we're going to see.
So who are the actual threat actors?
Well, and before we get to that, another point here, which is Hollywood is still churning out movies and television shows that perpetuate this this stereotype. So if you've seen the Mr. Robot show on the USA Network, which is a really wonderful show, but they're still focusing on a lone person, a hacker in a hoodie, going around and causing all these problems. And of course, the newspapers are talking a lot about Anonymous, which is the hacker collective that's caused some real damage. But altogether, whether these individuals who are causing trouble, these hacktivists, none of them really, in aggregate, are causing that $6 trillion damage estimate. Really, it's mostly being driven by what I call the millennial mobster. And on the FBI's most wanted list is, in fact, a guy named Bogachev, who, oddly enough, was born in 1983, the same year that that the War Games movie came out. And really, it's online criminals that are really driving. They're the protagonist in all this.
And it's not just criminal gangs, but it's criminal gangs that are in some that are, I should say, in many countries, if not outright supported by potentially hostile governments, then certainly not prosecuted, arrested, or controlled.
Right. So you've got online criminals in league with foreign intelligence services. In the case of Bogachev, we've got lots of evidence to suggest that he's being protected and supported by the Russian intelligence services. And so, and it's unfortunate, but it's a really great mashup for them to be working together, because here you've got a guy who's writing malicious code, who can break into banks silently and steal so much money, so much more than you could ever steal with a gun and a getaway car. Right? He's stolen over $100 million just from U.S. banks in the previous 8 years. But when he's in there stealing money, you've got people looking over his shoulder from the Foreign Intelligence Service saying, hey, while you're in here stealing the money, could we have that file and that file? And oh, can we have that database? And we'll take the information, thank you. And so it's a great cover, right, for the intelligence services, because they're not the ones that are actually doing any of the breaking and entering. So I mean, what a deal, huh?
Yeah.
So we've got this new normal going on, and they're the ones that are really driving the $6 trillion in damages that we talked about. And in fact, for our listeners, if you're an executive or if you work with or for an executive, you can actually consider Bogachev to be a competitor in a sense, because cybercrime has become an amazingly profitable business. Just one, just by using one exploit kit and a lot of virtual servers and a highly scripted, highly automated set of attacks, you can generate $34 million in a single year with just a simple ransomware campaign. And if you know how to steal a credit card, your cost of goods sold is practically zero. So it's just stunning, the amount of money at play here. And when you add it all up, you now begin to understand, where the $6 trillion figure is coming from.
You really do, Kip. And what's fascinating is how these criminals operate. They don't operate like, frankly, you would expect criminals to operate. Instead, they operate like, in some cases, very well-oiled businesses.
Oh, absolutely. They have They have well-lit office spaces, right? They're not huddled in the basement of abandoned buildings or anything like that. They have people on their payroll. They've got human resources departments and benefits and payroll. And
And they have some of the best customer service that you'll find.
that's right.
We'll talk about that. So we like to look at it as the dark value chain is value chain is just how industries create value among their different components, and oftentimes through specialization. For example, we are specialized in helping our clients manage their cyber risks.
Right.
You're going to go elsewhere. You're going to go to an accountant or a tax lawyer to deal with those risks and those issues, right?
Yeah, and even with cyber risk, if our customer needs a vulnerability scan, or if they need to upgrade their firewalls, we're going to bring other people into the situation to do that, because we're not trying to be all things to all people. So even we specialize within our niche.
We do, and the thing to know about the way this economy works is, much like our favorite tech companies, these guys are doing R&D, and they're constantly improving and evolving and changing their techniques. So when you look at cyber risk compared to, for example, fire or flood risk,
Mm-hmm.
it's very different. We know. There's a limited number of ways that fires can start. Flood data is very well kept over in some
That's right.
cases centuries, right?
Yeah, and analyzed in detail.
Analyzed in detail. The problem with cyber risk is that it changes virtually every day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much more difficult, though not impossible, to mitigate and prevent and control.
Well, the thing is that in as much as cyber risks are innovating all the time, your defenses have to innovate all the time.
They do, which means that cyber risk management isn't something that you just buy. It's something that you have to do, and that is where Cyber Risk Opportunities gets its slogan from.
That's right. Yeah.
This is a you cannot ever rest on your laurels, because the bad guys are constantly moving forward.
Yeah, and they're like germs, right? It's like the flu virus, which is constantly mutating, and we try our best to put a vaccine together every year, but that vaccine has different amounts of efficacy every year, and we inconvenience ourselves to get a flu shot every year, even knowing that that we might still get a strain of flu that the flu shot just really isn't effective against. But it's just part of our cyber hygiene, or our actual physical hygiene. But we need to have cyber hygiene, right? We need to have the equivalent of a flu shot and washing our hands multiple times a day to protect ourselves from germs and to protect other people from germs. And but back to this idea of specialization, right? So Satan is this really great example of specialization in the dark chain. Tell us about that, Jake.
So Satan is it's software as a service,
right?
Which is a very common term here. And it is you can sign up for it like you would any other software system on the web.
If
Gmail,
you can sign up for Netflix or Gmail, you can
Dropbox,
get this.
Yeah, even Amazon, as we were, AWS, as we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
There's even an option here to give a public key and turn on multi-factor authentication. So, you see that the criminals are probably using very good cyber hygiene in a lot of ways.
Yep, they are. Yep, absolutely. And right. So what's great about if you're a would-be criminal but you're not very technically savvy, you can go out and you can buy ransomware as a service from the fine people behind the Satan software as a service. And what's great about Satan is that you don't even have to put money up front, because just like the App Store, they'll just share your revenue with you. Isn't that amazing?
Revenue sharing is the way to go if you need to get some criminalized ransomware going, because what it is that it is a build your own malware attack. And you can there's all kinds of ways to do it. You can see here that your cut, if you use this service, is 70%, which ironically happens to be the exact same percentage you get from Apple's App Store.
Right. Yeah. So
So,
they're copying us, right? I mean,
yep.
they're our new competitor. They're looking at what we're doing and they're saying that works well in in the normal world. So we're just going to use it here.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that these guys use marketing um, concepts that are straight out of your playbook.
Yep.
So you look here at these plans, and you can see that basically this ransomware provider, they know that they have other, you could use other ransomware providers. Maybe you don't want Satan, maybe you want a different one.
Right.
um, and
Yeah.
here
You can take your dark business anywhere.
you can take your dark business anywhere. So here you are with your with your different choices. They have monthly costs. I mean, really, the point here isn't to make jokes about the criminal and how they are copying real business. The point is to be aware that this is what the criminals are doing, and it's extremely effective. And it's so easy that, like you said, you don't need to be Matthew Broderick from War Games. You don't need to be Mr. Robot. You can have basically no computer savvy at all, but if you know how to get online and do some basic setup, you can cause quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, whether that's a ransomware attack or a distributed denial of service attack, right? You can now rent all the technology that you need to do these things. And again, if you know how to steal a credit card or boost some Bitcoin from somebody's wallet, then you're not even paying for any of this stuff. So the cost of entry is just so low. Okay, so, so now that we kind of understand, what's driving, the engine behind all this damage that's happening now and will continue to happen, I think our listeners are probably wondering, what what in the world can I do to deal with this, right? And so one of the things that we talk about all the time with our customers is reasonable cybersecurity is what you really need to go for. So where does the idea of reasonable cybersecurity come from, Jake?
So, Kip, it comes from the Federal Trade Commission, which, as you can see here, is a law that was passed in 1914. It's a incredibly broad regulation that can be used in really almost anywhere in commerce. And you see here that this is the operative language, which is deceptively in a sense simple, but it is so powerful and so broad. And the idea here was that, and there was actually testimony in Congress about this when this act was passed, was that sure, you could write down every scam, trick, you know
Yeah, keep a catalog.
huckster, generated whatever, but when you finished, you'd have to start over again. That's almost a direct quote from the congressional testimony around this time period, and that was before the internet. That was before electronics.
Right. I mean, this is over 100 years ago in 1914.
It was, and but it remains. It's just as true today as it was in 1914. And so this is what Congress at the time came up with, which is we're going to say that you cannot engage in unfair, deceptive acts or practices.
Mm-hmm.
And what people started seeing is that, hey, we don't want to blame the victim, and I want to be clear on this point. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it is not that different than protecting your building against fire or flood.
Mm-hmm.
If you walk into a floodplain and you build your building there and take no precautions, it's kind of your fault when you get inevitably flooded, right? If you don't put in smoke alarms and you don't put in sprinklers into a building, well, these days, not only you won't be given the opportunity to inhabit that building because it will be deemed unsafe, but that, of course, wasn't always the case. All of these things that we take for granted, the flashing fire alarms, the noise, the many different types of fire suppression systems, all of this evolved over time.
That's right.
That is what we're trying to do with cybersecurity right now. And what the FTC has said is that reasonable security measures for cybersecurity are looked at from the perspective of an entity of similar size and sophistication to you, and you have to take into account the type, amount, and methods of data collected. And variations on this theme would include, you also have to look at the state of the art, right? So there was a time 20 years ago when having a firewall would have been frankly impressive. You know,
Yeah,
20 years ago, having a
more than
firewall,
sufficient.
more than sufficient. These days, having a firewall is a lot like having sprinklers.
Yep.
It's negligent, and in some cases, if you were to be a landlord and you were to run an apartment complex without adequate fire safety, it actually can become criminal,
Hmm.
right? Criminal negligence.
Yep.
So we're not there yet with cybersecurity, but we do impose a civil duty, responsibility to take reasonable security measures, and it, it that it, just like fire safety and fire insurance and all of those requirements in the building code, it is rapidly evolving.
Yeah,
So
and reasonable means compared to other organizations of your size and the type and the amount and methods of the data that you collect. So, you know, if you're a small business, the FTC isn't going to compare you to a large enterprise, right? If you know, they're not going to say, well, you run a pizza shop, you should have the same type of reasonable security that Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, should
yep.
have, right? So that
But
you don't have to worry about that.
you don't. But you do need to be careful there, because you also can't just say, oh well, everyone's not doing anything, so we're good. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't work that way. It tends to be more that uh, egregious acts by someone in your industry will push the bar forward a little bit, and this tends to be how the law gets made in this arena, which is bit by bit, case by case. Things evolve.
Right. Well, so now for our listeners, we should really kind of talk a little bit about, okay, how do you take this FTC concept and how do you interpret it so that you can figure out what's reasonable for you? And what we talk to our customers about is that cybersecurity is how you travel. It's not just a product that you purchase. It's not a state that you will be able to achieve and then to be able to perpetuate, because as we've said, the threat innovates all the time. Even if you think you have great cybersecurity, just by standing still, you can find yourself losing ground. Like we said, if you had a firewall 20 years ago, you were great. But if you are using 20-year-old technical controls today, and you haven't modernized, then somebody's going to come around and eat your lunch for sure. So we ask our customers, and we would challenge you as a listener to think about, what's the quality of your cybersecurity journey. How are you getting around? And I often show a photograph of a train with men hanging off the side of it. The kind of picture that you'd see coming out of maybe India or Pakistan. Where this kind of behavior is considered common. And hanging off the side of a train to me seems like a very risky way to get where you're going, but it's cheap, and it probably doesn't smell as bad as being in a coach, and I guess I can see why people might think it's a fun way to get around, but clearly when that train is going to enter into a tunnel, the last place you want to be is hanging off the side of it. So think about, is that how your cybersecurity, um, is that how you're traveling, where you're just hanging off the side of this train because you don't want to spend the money, you can't see what you get for it. That's all totally understandable, but you may need to actually buy a ticket and sit in a third class carriage. You maybe don't need to spend the kind of money that that a large organization spends, but you need to figure out some way to make sure that your journey is sufficiently protected. And we also think that cybersecurity is a great management opportunity. We talked a little bit before about how there's an upside to cyber risk. If you can do a good job of managing your cyber risks, then when something bad happens to a lot of different organizations at the same time, if you can stay in business while your competitors are struggling, then that's a win for you. because as we saw last summer when the NotPetya virus ran through Eastern Europe, FedEx TNT overnight package delivery got hit really hard and couldn't actually deliver the packages that they had, and they couldn't take new packages either. But DHL, who was a competitor, stayed in business. And what we're seeing from the financial results that they're revealing in public now is that DHL really made a killing because all these people switched, and they're probably not going to switch back anytime soon, even after FedEx kind of gets back on its feet again. So yeah, what we tell customers is the best way to achieve reasonable cybersecurity, there's two basic strategies that you want to follow. And the first strategy is you want to be a difficult target. Most of the cyber criminals are looking for easy targets, right? They're like people checking out cars in a vast park and ride lot, looking for the makes and models that are the easiest and fastest for them to get into and steal and make their getaway. So, if you just have a couple of things that are going to make it harder for somebody to steal your car, you've got a club on your steering wheel or something like that, the criminals are just going to keep walking, not because the club is impossible to defeat. It's not. But just because there's easier targets, all right? So that's what you want to do, is you don't want to be an easy target. And you also want to become cyber resilient, because the attacks that are coming at us today are so much more powerful and so much more effective than they have been in the past, that it's inevitable that we're all going to suffer a cyber attack sooner or later. And so what you want to make sure that is that if you end up in a situation where you're being attacked, you want to resist that attack, and you want to stay in business and get back to normal as fast as possible. So those are really the two things that you need to do operationally these days. And legally, what would you add, Jake?
Well, it's interesting. I think that I wanted to just talk about that resiliency concept and how that is actually becoming a legal requirement as well. I mean, if you look at the European General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which goes into effect on May 25th, 2018. If you're watching this later, it's already in effect. And they have the traditional triad of security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but they add resiliency. And so it's becoming perhaps more in vogue to talk about not so much the triad, but the quadrad. I don't know what you call that.
Probably.
And because now you're looking at confidentiality, integrity, availability, and resiliency. And the very first example you gave of code spaces, they lacked resiliency.
Big time.
Big time. They had zero resiliency, and it cost them everything.
Yep.
So,
and the data that they had was remained confidential. It probably had great integrity, but it was never available again.
Yeah, and because of a lack of resiliency.
Right.
And so you can see how this kind of works together. And part of becoming a difficult target and becoming cyber resilient is documenting your practices, getting procedures in place, practicing them. There's a lot of administrative, quote, legal requirements that are part of this. It is not just about configuring your firewall properly.
No,
it is not just about making sure that your technicians are at the right place at the right time. It really is everybody in the organization. As we said at the start of our podcast, the beginning episode, we're all foot soldiers in the cyber wars, and this kind of shows you why.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.